Settle in, everyone. The lecture is starting. Tonight, we explore the story of Christmas and Capital. Mute your devices and let's journey into the past. Good Night Lecture Hall is on air. The system of visual codes, consumption as a marker of a state. In the era of the High Middle Ages and the early Renaissance, the concept of a market in its modern sense was virtually non-existent. Consumption was not an act of individual choice. It was a ritual of identity confirmation. Society was a rigid vertical hierarchy where every object, from the length of a shoe's toe to the number of buttons on a doublet, was strictly regulated. The central tool for controlling consumption was the sumptuary laws. These acts, adopted in England, France, Venice, and other states, pursued an ideological rather than an economic goal. They protected the sacred distance between social estates. If a wealthy merchant who had earned gold in the wool trade decided to dress his wife in purple silk or adorn her gown with ermine fur, he was committing more than just an expensive purchase. It was an act of political aggression. Purple and ermine were visual symbols of the high aristocracy. Consumption without the inherent right to status was considered a crime, comparable to the forgery of documents. Thus, at the dawn of capitalism, an object possessed not a price, but a significance. Holiday periods were times when this symbolism was pushed to its absolute. Feasts and castles were not merely dinners, but theatrical performances of power. The use of exotic spices such as saffron or cinnamon, which cost entire fortunes, served as proof that the Lord had access to global resources inaccessible to an ordinary mortal. Holiday as a mechanism of social balance. In pre-capitalist Europe, the holiday, such as the 12 days of Christmas, functioned as a temporary suspension of hierarchy. There existed the tradition of the Lord of Misrule, where for the duration of the festivities, servants and masters could switch roles. From an economic perspective, this was a period of unproductive waste. The feudal elite were obliged to demonstrate largesse. This was a form of social tax. A lord accumulated surplus product throughout the year only to demonstratively distribute it in the form of massive feasts and gifts. This was not an investment in production. It was an investment in loyalty and legitimacy. Capitalism would later destroy this model. It replaced the gift with the transaction, and generosity with efficiency, the age of discovery and the birth of commodity fetishism. Now, let's talk about the moment everything really changed, the age of discovery. At the end of the 15th century, ships captained by men like Columbus, Vasco da Gama, and Magellan started opening up these massive new trade routes. And suddenly, Europe was flooded with things that completely rewired the way people wanted, well, everything. We're talking about exotic spices, sugar, tea, silk, and fine porcelain. These became the very first objects of global capitalism. This was the birth of mercantilism. Governments stopped counting their power by how many loyal knights they had, and started counting it in gold. Massive corporations, like the British East India Company, basically became states within states. And they brought a brand new concept to the West: the exotic. Think about sugar for a second. It's funny, but back then it was actually sold in pharmacies as a high-end medicine. But soon it became the ultimate status symbol for the holiday table. The super rich started making these things called sautelties, huge, incredibly detailed sculptures made entirely out of sugar. It was the ultimate flex. You were basically showing your guests that you were so wealthy You could afford to literally eat your own capital. In a way, that was the very first prototype of modern marketing, turning a simple food item into a powerful symbol of success. The bourgeois revolution of taste, the Dutch experience. Eventually, the whole scene shifted over to the Netherlands. By the 17th century, this place had become the real laboratory of capitalism. This is where a new kind of person stepped onto the stage: the urban burger. See, unlike the old school aristocrats, these guys didn't just inherit their right to luxury, they went out and bought it. If you look at Dutch paintings from that time, the ones by Vermeer or de Hooch, you can actually see the birth of what we now call home comfort. The holiday moved from the massive castle halls and right into the private living room. And of course, that sparked a huge demand for small luxury items. People started obsessing over things like fancy mirrors, Turkish carpets, and delicate Chinese porcelain. This was the first real stage of commodification. The holiday stopped being just a public event in the town square and became an excuse to buy things to decorate your own personal space. But we can't talk about Holland without mentioning tulip mania in the 1630s. It was the first big warning sign of what capitalism could do. I mean, think about it. The price of one single rare flower bulb could be more than the cost of an entire house. That was the exact moment when the value of a thing completely detached from reality. Beauty became a gamble, and aesthetics turned into pure, raw speculation. From stall to store, the architecture of seduction. Finally, let's look at how the cities themselves started to change. By the end of the 17th century, London and Paris began a massive transformation. Those dark, cramped medieval markets were disappearing, and in their place we see the very first prototypes of the modern shop. The real game changer here was glass. Even though it was still incredibly expensive back then, these new large display windows changed the psychology of everyone walking by. For the first time ever, the product became a spectacle. This gave birth to a phenomenon we all know today: window shopping. Suddenly, you could feel a deep longing for an object before you even stepped through the door or spoke to a salesman. It was pure visual desire. Holidays like New Year's began to exploit this new attraction. Shopkeepers started decorating their storefronts to catch the eye after dark, using candles and mirrors to multiply the light. This was the birth of the festive city aesthetic, a place where every lantern and every display window is a silent call to go out and make a purchase. Chapter 2: The Industrial Rift, Mass Production and the Death of Uniqueness. Let's talk about time. Before the Industrial Revolution, time was organic and cyclical. If you were a peasant or a craftsman, you lived by the daylight and the changing seasons. A holiday was just a natural pause in the rhythm of nature. However, capitalism in the 18th and 19th centuries introduced a new concept: linear mechanical time. With the rise of factories, time turned into a measurable resource, something that could be bought or sold. The introduction of rigid work schedules and factory whistles meant that a holiday could no longer last as long as tradition dictated. Capitalist discipline demanded predictability. The traditional Saint Mondays, when workers would continue their Sunday celebrations into the next day, were outlawed as a threat to efficiency. The holiday was violently compressed into what we now call a weekend or a day off. This created a massive psychological deficit of joy, and the market rushed in to fill that void. If a worker had less time to celebrate, then that time had to become more concentrated and filled with as many store-bought goods as possible. If the hero of the first chapter was a lord dressed in silk, then the hero of our second chapter is Josiah Wedgwood, the man who basically invented modern marketing. Before him, the market was split in two. You either had unique handmade masterpieces for the elite, or crude, homemade junk for the poor. Wedgwood was the first to bridge this gap by applying what we now call economies of scale. He split his production into two clever categories: ornamental for the palaces and useful for the masses. But here was his stroke of genius. The useful pottery looked almost exactly like the aesthetics of his royal commissions. He invented the concept of status imitation. When a middle-class family bought Wedgwood's creamware, they weren't just buying a plate. They were buying the illusion of belonging to the world of Queen Charlotte. To fuel this desire, Wedgwood didn't just wait for customers, he created them. He opened the first luxury showrooms in London, designed as theatrical spaces where the middle class could practice being aristocratic. He pioneered the money-back guarantee, free delivery, and illustrated catalogs that traveled where his shops could not. This was the moment uniqueness died. An object was no longer valuable because it was one of a kind. It became valuable because it looked like what the people at the top had. But it was actually affordable. The holiday dinner table became the very first stage for demonstrating this mass market luxury. The festive meal was no longer just about the food. It was about the brand name stamped on the bottom of the plate. Wedgwood taught us that in a capitalist world, looking successful is just as important as being successful. Alienation of labor and compensatory consumption. As the steam engine and Arkwright's machines took over, the very nature of work changed forever. The worker stopped being a creator. What happened was a deep sense of alienation. A person no longer saw the final result of their labor, only the endless repetition of a single, soul-crushing operation. The product they created didn't belong to them. It belonged to the owner of the capital. This created a deep existential void, and capitalism, ever efficient, offered a solution. If you cannot find meaning in your work, you will find it in your purchases. Consumption became a form of psychological compensation for the humiliation felt on the factory floor. Christmas and New Year's transformed from days of collective spiritual unity into days of individual material reward. The formula, "I worked hard all year, so I deserve this item," became the main engine of the holiday market. Now, let us look at the death of local traditions and the triumph of standardization. Mass production demanded uniformity. It is simply not profitable for capitalism to support thousands of unique regional customs. Industry needed millions of people wanting the same product at the same time. Previously, a gift was unique. A whistle carved by a father or a doll sewn by a mother. But now, a gift had to be purchased. A store-bought item started to be seen as more real, more professional than something handmade. This led to the market dictating exactly what a holiday should look like. A festive norm emerged, a specific set of dishes, decorations, and gifts. If you lacked these, you didn't just feel left out, you felt socially inadequate. The railway revolution, the circulatory system of capital, The invention of the railways in the mid-19th century finally destroyed the centuries-old isolation of the regions. Before the steam engine, a remote village was a world unto itself, with its own eccentric customs and handmade traditions. But the iron tracks changed everything. Now, goods from the massive warehouses of London could arrive in a distant Scottish village in a matter of hours, not weeks. This was the birth of the national market. It allowed large manufacturers to launch the very first synchronized national advertising campaigns. Think about the psychological impact. Along with the physical goods, powerful new cultural codes began to travel the rails. A single standard of a metropolitan Christmas started to displace provincial identity. The holiday became synchronized. For the first time in history, the entire nation was looking at the same advertising posters, desiring the same brands at the exact same moment. The railway stations themselves became the new cathedrals of consumption. They were plastered with bright, mass-produced posters that promised a better life through the purchase of a specific ham, a specific toy, or a specific bottle of wine. The steam engine was not just transporting coal, it was transporting desire. It became the circulatory system of capitalist consumption, pumping festive excess into the most remote corners of the country. If the factory whistle taught us when to work, the railway schedule taught us when and what to buy. By the time the first Victorian trains pulled into the stations on Christmas Eve, they weren't just delivering gifts. They were delivering the final blow to local uniqueness, replacing it with the standardized, commercialized joy. Chapter 3: The Birth of the Storefront. The Psychology of the 19th Century Department Store. Let us look at the architecture of desire. From the humble market stall to the palace of consumption. In the middle of the 19th century, urban space underwent a radical transformation. The rise of department stores like Bon Marché in Paris, Macy's in New York, and Selfridges in London marked the birth of a new religion: shopping. Before this, buying something was a purely functional and often unpleasant procedure. You would walk into a cramped shop, haggle with a cynical clerk, and you wouldn't even see the goods until he pulled them out from a dark corner under the counter. The department store destroyed that distance. These buildings were designed like cathedrals: high ceilings, marble staircases, an abundance of gold, and most importantly, massive mirrors. Architecture no longer served God or the state. It served the product. Upon entering, the buyer found themselves in a space where time stood still. All everyday problems faded before the brilliance of crystal and silk. It was a space of controlled seduction. The store became the first place in history where a middle-class woman could walk freely without a male guardian, as long as she was there to consume. Now consider the plate glass revolution. Technical progress in glass manufacturing allowed for the creation of massive, transparent planes. The display window became the first screen in human history, broadcasting dreams of a beautiful life to the masses outside. The passerby on the street was transformed into a spectator, and the product into an actor. During the holidays, window dressing turned into a high art form. They featured entire mechanical plays, snowy villages, moving dolls, and mountains of gifts. This gave birth to window shopping. People began coming to stores not to buy, but to receive aesthetic pleasure. Capitalism brilliantly merged leisure and consumption. To feel the joy of the holiday, you had to walk past 1,000 temptations, each one whispering that your life would be better. After the purchase, the privatization of the miracle, the day Santa moved into the mall. In the 1860s, the architecture of consumption reached its final psychological frontier. Department stores achieved a breakthrough that no church or state could replicate. They began inviting actors dressed as Santa Claus to live within their walls. Think about the gravity of this shift. A festive symbol that for centuries lived only in the shadows of folklore. A spirit that belonged to the wind and the chimney was suddenly given a physical body, a fixed salary, and a seat on the second floor of a retail palace. The pilgrimage changed its destination forever. A child no longer looked to the winter stars or the parish altar to encounter the divine. They went to the store. And this was the final, brutal commodification of the myth. But look at the geography of this trap. To reach the saint, to sit on his velvet lap and whisper a secret wish. The child and the parent had to navigate a carefully designed labyrinth. You couldn't just see Santa. You had to earn him by passing through miles of glittering aisles, through the scent of imported chocolates, past the mechanical dolls that sang of luxury, and under the weight of 1,000 price tags. The path to the miracle now led directly through the checkout counter. The store didn't just sell toys, it sold the access to the holiday itself. Retail had successfully hijacked the biological clock of the family. They created the season, a financial behemoth that provides up to 50% of a store's annual revenue. By 1900, the holiday was no longer a break from the market. It was the market's primary reason for existence. Chapter. Summary: the colonization of the human heart. As the 19th century closed its doors, the department store had completed the total occupation of our inner lives. First, the conquest of space. The store replaced the cathedral and the town square as the only place where people felt truly alive. Second, the engineering of psychology. Consumption was rebranded as an emotional reward, a cure for the boredom of the industrial age. Third, the dictatorship of visuality. The plate glass window became our first collective screen, teaching us what to want before we even knew who we were. And finally, the theft of symbolism. The sacred images, the tree, the star, the saint, were all privatized as corporate assets. They became intellectual property, designed to trigger a purchase reflex. The world entered the 20th century with a terrifyingly clear realization. If a holiday is not reflected in the neon glow of a storefront, and if your joy cannot be proven by a printed receipt, then in the eyes of the modern world, it simply didn't happen. Chapter 4. The Sacralization of the Holiday. How Christmas Became a Brand. Let us look at the Victorian engineering of traditions. What we call a traditional Christmas today is largely an artificial construct of the mid-19th century. Before this time, the holiday in the Anglo-Saxon world was fragmented, often crude, and lacked any unified visual style. Capitalism needed a universal template. It needed a script that could be replicated, standardized, and ultimately monetized. Literature and the press played the role of the primary architect. In 1843, Charles Dickens published A Christmas Carol. He created more than just a literary work. He created an ideal consumption script. Dickens canonized the image of the holiday as a time of family unity around an abundant table. He effectively sold the middle class the concept of the holiday as a moral obligation to spend money. To be a good person in the Victorian era came to mean buying the turkey, the gifts, and the decorations. Ethics and economics merged into a single entity. Refusing to spend on the holiday was no longer just a personal choice. It was perceived as a social deviation. Now let us examine a case of Prince Albert and the imported tree. This was quite literally the first instance of viral marketing in human history. In 1841, Prince Albert installed a Christmas tree at Windsor Castle. It was a tradition from his native Germany, an exotic curiosity to the British public. But everything changed in 1848 when the Illustrated London News published an engraving of the royal family standing beside that decorated tree. This single image shaped a global market in a matter of months. Before the publication, the tree was a foreign oddity. After the publication, it became an absolute necessity for anyone claiming respectability. Capitalism reacted with lightning speed. New industries exploded overnight. Commercial logging, specialized tree stands, and most importantly, the mass production of glass ornaments from Bohemia. The tree was transformed from a religious symbol into a domestic display window. It was a stage where every family showcased its prosperity to their neighbors. The message was silent but deafening. Your worth as a family is measured by the glitter on your branches, the birth of the greeting card, the automation of emotion. In 1843, Sir Henry Cole, a busy civil servant and entrepreneur, faced a very modern problem. He had too many acquaintances to congratulate personally. The manual labor of friendship had become inefficient. He hired the artist John Horsley to design a card that could be replicated through lithography. This was a profound moment of transition, from deep personal communication to a standardized industrial gesture. Capitalism offered a brilliant solution to social anxiety. Its message was, you don't need to find your own words. We have already printed them for you. The greeting card became the perfect commodity. It had zero practical value. It cost almost nothing to produce. Yet it carried an immense social weight. By the end of the 19th century, postal services were transporting billions of these cards. The market had successfully turned personal feelings into a massive stream of revenue for printing houses and post offices. We didn't just buy a card. We bought the relief of fulfilling a social obligation with a single stamp. Now, let us consider toys and the construction of childhood. Before the capitalist boom, children were largely treated as little adults. Their toys were random, incidental objects. But in the 19th century, capitalism invented childhood as a special, protected, and highly profitable zone of consumption. The holiday became the primary theater where parents demonstrated their success through the purchase of mass-produced joy. The Industrial Revolution allowed factories to churn out tin soldiers, porcelain dolls, and model railways by the thousands. But these were not just playthings. They were tools for social engineering. Girls were taught to be consumers of domesticity through elaborate dollhouses. Boys were taught to be consumers of technology and conquest through construction sets and weaponry. The holiday dinner was transformed into an annual exam in good parenting. And the grade? The grade was determined by the total cost of the gifts under the tree. Capitalism had managed to link a parent's love directly to their purchasing power. If you loved your child, You proved it with a receipt. The sacred becomes commercial. The role of advertising. During this pivotal era, advertising began to cannibalize religious and family archetypes. What occurred was a sacralization of consumption. Brands stopped being mere labels and started using the imagery of the divine. Angels, stars, and saints were no longer used for prayer. They were used to build a subconscious trust in the product. In the past, holiness was associated with asceticism, the rejection of worldly goods to find the soul. But capitalism inverted this logic. Now, holiness became inextricably linked with abundance. Advertising posters of the late 19th century began to whisper a dangerous new theology. God blesses those whose homes are full of goods. This was a fundamental shift in the human spirit. It allowed capitalism to occupy the space once held by religion in our rituals. The holiday stopped being a time to contemplate eternity and became a time to celebrate current material success. The light of the soul was replaced by the light of the store window. Chapter summary: The holiday as intellectual property of the market. By the dawn of the 20th century, Christmas and New Year had been completely reformatted. The market didn't just participate in the holiday, it became its legal and spiritual owner. Let us look at the new laws of the season. First, the canon. A single visual standard was enforced: the tree, the specific gifts, the staged family dinner. Deviation was no longer an option. Second, the automation of emotion. Sincere feelings were replaced by purchased gestures. The greeting card became the proxy for your heart. Third, the colonization of childhood. The world of the child was transformed into the primary hunting ground for toy monopolies. And finally, the new morality. Consumption became a form of civic and religious virtue. Capitalism had created conditions where celebrating without the participation of corporations began to seem impossible. To be outside the market during the holidays was to be outside of society itself. The festive spirit had been patented, packaged, and sold back to us at a significant markup. Chapter 5. The Era of Fordism, the Worker as a Consumer. In 1914, Henry Ford shocked the business world by setting a minimum wage of $5 a day at his plants. This was not an act of altruism. Ford was a cold, brilliant pragmatist. He realized a simple truth. If his workers were paid pennies, who would buy the millions of Model T cars rolling off his assembly lines? This was the rise of Fordism, an economic model where mass production is locked in a deadly embrace with mass consumption. The working class stopped being just a resource. They became the target audience. In this new system, the holiday took on a sinister new function. It became the carrot on a stick, the primary reason to endure the monotonous, soul-crushing labor of the conveyor belt. Capitalism offered a dark new social contract. Give me your individuality at the factory for 300 days, and I will give you the money to buy your individuality back at the store during the holidays. The gift was no longer a gesture of love. It was a ransom paid for a stolen life. Now let us examine the conveyor belt Christmas and the birth of the middle class. With the rising incomes of workers and clerks, a new social stratum emerged. For these people, the holiday became a loud announcement of their new status. Festive excess was no longer a privilege of the old elite. It became a mandatory performance for millions. Mass production allowed prices to collapse. Goods that were once considered luxuries, gramophones, radios, vacuum cleaners, suddenly became standard gifts. The holiday was transformed into an annual report on the family's material progress. Fordism created a culture where happiness was measured in cubic inches, and the number of branded boxes under the tree by January 1st. This was the exact moment the American dream began to take its physical shape. A house in the suburbs, a car in the garage, and a tree piled so high with products that the branches could barely hold the weight. Individual taste was replaced by brand loyalty. The holiday didn't celebrate the birth of a savior or the turn of the year. It celebrated the triumph of the assembly line over the human soul, discipline and leisure, the rationalization of joy. In the Fordist era, capitalism demanded a surgical separation of time into work and free time. The holiday was finally rationalized. Old folk celebrations, which could spontaneously drag on for days, unpredictable and chaotic, were systematically displaced by a rigid calendar of official days off. Capitalism cannot afford a hangover that lasts until Wednesday. To prevent workers from wasting their wages on gambling or the local tavern, corporations began to sponsor the holiday themselves. The birth of the corporate party was not an act of kindness, it was a soft method of social control. The company gifted you the holiday, but in exchange, it demanded loyalty to the employer's brand. New Year bonuses and company gift baskets became tools for employee retention. The holiday was fully integrated into the human resource management system. It became just another predictable element of the production cycle. Now, consider the electrification of the dream. The 1920s were the decade of the electric boom. Capitalism began aggressively selling household appliances as the ultimate Christmas gift. The advertising of the time whispered, "Give your wife freedom. Buy her an electric washing machine." The holiday became a massive lever for forcing technological innovation into every domestic corner. Think about the electric garland on the tree. It replaced the dangerous flickering candle, but at a hidden cost. The garland tied the holiday directly to communal networks and monthly electricity bills. The celebration ceased to be an autonomous act within the family circle. It became dependent on the infrastructure of capitalism. Every glowing window in the new suburbs was no longer just a sign of joy. It was a live 30-day advertisement for the achievements of electrical corporations. We didn't just light up our homes. We turned our private lives into a billboard for the system. Free time as a new market. The colonization of the weekend. Fordism shortened the work week, creating the cultural phenomenon of the weekend. But make no mistake, capitalism could not allow this time to remain free. The holiday period became the primary harvest for the entertainment industry. Every act of celebration was translated into the language of transactions. Going to the cinema for a Christmas premiere, driving downtown to look at the lights. These were not just moments of joy. They were demands for tickets, gasoline, and constant purchases. Capitalism created a powerful, lasting illusion that rest is an activity that requires expenditure. Doing nothing, pure, unmonetized contemplation, began to be perceived as a social failure, a sign of depression or laziness. In its place, the holiday hustle was born. The frantic shopping spree became the only socially approved form of leisure. We were taught that to relax, we first had to exhaust our bank accounts. And now we are moving into the most subtle and most manipulative part of this entire history. As we enter the middle of the 20th century, the gears of capitalism shifted. Previously, goods were sold by appealing to their quality, their price, or their utility. But that was not enough for the total market. The focus shifted from the wallet to the subconscious. Capitalism stopped selling things. It began to sell identity. It began to sell status. And most effectively, it began to sell relief from internal fears. The holiday gift was no longer an object. It was a psychological band-aid for the existential void of the modern age. Welcome to the era of the hidden persuaders, selling lifestyle and the fragmentation of the soul. In the mid-20th century, advertising performed a masterstroke. It stopped dividing people by their bank accounts and started dividing them by their lifestyle. Capitalism realized it could sell the exact same product to completely different people, simply by changing the myth attached to it. Holiday catalogs became textbooks for social navigation. They didn't just list prices, they dictated identity. They explained what a modern intellectual should gift to prove his sophistication, and what a caring housewife must choose to prove her devotion. Consumption became our primary form of communication. The silent question of the holiday season became, "Tell me what you bought, and I will tell you who you are." This gave rise to the hollow culture of brand fetishism. An object was no longer valued for its use. It was valued for its ability to transmit a coded message about its owner's status, politics, and dreams. The holiday became a mass demonstration of these signals, a theater where we perform our identities through the things we own. Now let us look at the most haunting tool in the marketing arsenal: the exploitation of nostalgia. Psychologists on the corporate payroll discovered that nostalgia is the most powerful trigger for an impulsive purchase. Capitalism began to aggressively weaponize the image of the good old days. But observe the staggering paradox. The very industry that had systematically destroyed the old world, its quiet villages, its slow pace, its handmade soul, was now selling an expensive imitation of that world back to us. Antique-style ornaments, traditional recipes in glossy plastic packaging, retro-style clothing. It all serves one dark purpose: to evoke a warm, aching longing for a past we never actually lived, and then immediately offer a piece of that past for a price. The holiday became a time machine running on receipts. We buy mass-produced items to feel a connection with ancestors who would barely recognize the world we've built. It is the ultimate irony. Seeking a sense of belonging in the output of a soulless assembly line. Chapter Summary: The Triumph of Illusion. By the 1960s, advertising psychology had completed a fundamental re-engineering of the human being. We were no longer citizens or even simple customers. We had become permanently hungry biological units of consumption. Let us look at the four pillars of this triumph. First, desires. They were surgically detached from physical needs and tethered to volatile emotions. You don't buy because you are cold. You buy because you feel insignificant. Second, myths. Ancient stories of kindness and magic were privatized by global brands. They were turned into sales agents. The Star of Bethlehem was replaced by the neon logo, and the saint was put on the corporate payroll. Third, guilt. This became the primary engine of holiday spending. The fear of not measuring up, the terror of being the only house on the street with fewer lights, or the only parent who didn't buy the "it" toy. Capitalism learned that insecurity is the most profitable resource on Earth. And fourth, identity. Who you are became nothing more than a collection of the brands you consume. Your soul was mapped out in a series of receipts. In those decades, capitalism proved something terrifying. It is possible to control a society not through force or fear, but through the management of dreams. The holiday became the primary instrument of this invisible control. It evolved into an annual spectacular triumph of marketing over common sense. The celebration was no longer for us. We were the ones being celebrated upon. Chapter 7: The Post-War Boom, Credit Aesthetics, and the American Dream. After 1945, the Western world entered an era of unprecedented prosperity. But this boom had a dark, hidden undercurrent, the paralyzing fear of the Great Depression's return. To keep the massive wartime factories from falling silent, the population had to be trained to consume more than ever before in human history. The holiday was no longer just a personal event. It became an economic imperative. In the 1950s, politicians and economists spoke with terrifying clarity. They argued that buying New Year's gifts was a direct contribution to national security. Holiday spending became the primary measure of the nation's health. In this new moral landscape, being thrifty in December was seen as almost unpatriotic. Capitalism had successfully reforged human morality. The old virtue of accumulation was replaced by the new duty of spending for the common good. To save money was to betray the system. Now let us look at the geography of the dream. Suburbia. The mass migration to the suburbs changed the festive landscape forever. Instead of cramped city apartments, we had detached houses with lawns. And with those lawns, capitalism created a massive new market: exterior decor. The holiday moved beyond the privacy of the living room and became a public competition among neighbors. The number of string lights on your facade, the size of the inflatable figures on your lawn, these were no longer decorations. They were indicators of a family's creditworthiness. Suburbia turned the new year into a visual parade of capitalist success. The home became a theater of consumption. Every detail, and from the automatic outdoor lighting to the modern chrome-filled kitchen where the turkey was prepared, served as tangible proof that the family had achieved the American dream. The dream, however, was built on a foundation of debt. We weren't just celebrating a holiday, we were performing a 30-day commercial for the prosperity we had borrowed from the future. The most important tool of the post-war era was the credit card. Before the emergence of Diners Club in 1950, the holiday was limited by reality. You could only spend what you had actually earned and saved over the year. But credit destroyed this biological barrier of the economy. Capitalism offered the individual a seductive, dark miracle: the chance to buy the future at the expense of today. The holiday was rebranded as a time when one could afford to be blind to price tags. This gave birth to the culture of delayed pain. The chemical joy of possessing a new object occurs in the glitter of December, while the cold, crushing realization of its cost arrives only with the January bills. Credit aesthetics fundamentally changed the psychology of the season. It stopped being a time for reflecting on the year's results and became a time of unbridled advance. The system taught us to spend money we didn't yet have, on things we didn't always need, just to impress people we didn't even like. In the 1950s, the television became the main altar of the domestic space. If previous advertising was static, a flat image in a newspaper, now it invaded the home with moving bodies, manipulative music, and hypnotic sound. Holiday shows, sponsored by giants like General Electric or Ford, surgically blurred the line between entertainment and a sales pitch. But the most effective weapon was the birth of pester power. For the first time, advertising aimed directly at the minds of children. The holiday stopped being a surprise, a mystery, or a miracle. It became the fulfillment of an order from a catalog seen on the screen. Television synchronized the desires of millions. It created a unified consumer space where every family felt a desperate obligation to buy the exact same things as their on-air neighbors. The screen didn't just show us products. It dictated the very shape of our dreams, ensuring that no child and no parent could escape the corporate script. Planned obsolescence, the engineering of the temporary. In the post-war period, capitalism introduced its most cynical strategy yet: planned obsolescence. Products were no longer designed to last. They were designed to expire, either mechanically or, more importantly, psychologically. The new year was rebranded as the ultimate moment for an upgrade. Advertising whispered that keeping last year's television or vacuum cleaner was a visible sign of stagnation. The holiday was transformed into a ritual of purge and replacement. A festive gift ceased to be an object meant to last for generations. It became a temporary placeholder, a disposable token whose value vanished the moment the next model was announced. We began to live in a world of accelerated waste. The gift was no longer a legacy. It was merely a subscription to the current trend, paid for in full but destined for the landfill. Chapter summary: The credit paradise. By the 1970s, the post-war boom had successfully completed the modern face of holiday consumption. Let us look at the structure of this new world. First, space. The holiday became an outward spectacle. In the suburbs, your joy was measured by the wattage of your exterior lights. Second, finance. Credit became the oxygen of demand. It destroyed the ancient culture of savings, replacing it with the buy now, pay later psychosis. Third, media. Television synchronized the heartbeat of the nation. It turned the weeks of preparation into one continuous, inescapable advertising reel. And finally, ideology. Consumption was finally and fully equated with happiness and social progress. Capitalism had created a reality where a holiday is no longer a pause in work, but the absolute peak of economic aggression. It is a system supported by the twin pillars of financial debt and media pressure. By 1970, we weren't just celebrating a holiday, we were serving the machine. Expansion of standards. McDonald's and Coca-Cola as the new missionaries. At the end of the 20th century, capitalism entered its phase of total, aggressive globalization. The holiday became the West's primary export commodity. Images of a white Christmas, the specific red of Santa Claus, and a standardized aesthetic of decoration began to be surgically embedded into cultures with zero historical connection to them. This was not a simple cultural exchange, it was infrastructural colonization. Global retailers offered more than products. They offered a pre-packaged holiday experience. Look at Japan. Through a brilliant marketing campaign in the 1970s, a bucket of KFC fried chicken became a national Christmas tradition. Capitalism proved a terrifying point. To create a sacred tradition, you don't need centuries of history. Efficient logistics and a massive advertising budget are more than enough. The holiday became a universal language of consumption, a digital steamroller erasing borders and national identity in favor of a single global brand. Now let us examine the high point of this madness. Black Friday. Globalization turned the preparation for the holiday into a standalone, quasi-religious ritual of violence. If previously the holiday was a season of peace, its eve has now become a time of aggressive competition. Capitalism took the concept of bargain hunting to a grotesque extreme. Black Friday is the absolute peak of commodity fetishism. Think about the footage of people storming stores, crushing one another at the doors. It is the perfect metaphor for our era. In these moments, a human being acts not as an individual, but as a biological unit programmed for consumption. The holiday no longer begins with the appearance of the first star in the sky. It begins with the first ring of the bell on the stock exchange, or the sound of locks turning at the hypermarket. This was the final total victory of the logic of accumulating things over the logic of accumulating meaning. The receipt has become the only scripture that matters. Fast culture, the disposable holiday. With the massive shift of production to Southeast Asia, capitalism evolved into its most wasteful form, the fast fashion and fast decor model. We have reached a terrifying economic tipping point where things have become so cheap that storing them is actually more expensive than buying them new. Festive decor has been downgraded to disposable trash. Billions of plastic ornaments, synthetic trees, and toxic tinsel are churned out to serve for exactly 14 days before being exiled to a landfill. This is the apotheosis of capitalist inefficiency disguised as affordability. The culture of the fast holiday has successfully lobotomized the consumer. It has trained us to believe that the value of an object is zero. The chemical high of a purchase has become so short-lived that it necessitates an immediate secondary purchase just to maintain the mood. The holiday has turned into a massive global conveyor belt designed to process natural resources into plastic waste using our wallets as the filter. Now consider the infrastructural erasure of the local context. Global capitalism has entered into a final conflict with local traditions. Everywhere, from the streets of Paris to the plazas of Bangkok, shopping malls have begun to look exactly the same. The same corporate colors, the same synthesized Christmas hits, the same algorithmic promotions. This is cultural homogenization. Local craftsmen and unique festive traditions could not survive the onslaught of giants like IKEA or Walmart. The holiday has become sterile, predictable, and safe for the balance sheet. Capitalism sold us convenience and cheapness in exchange for the diversity of human experience. We are no longer participants in a living culture. We are participants in a single global flash mob, following a script written in the headquarters of multinational corporations. We are all celebrating the same branded void. Logistics as magic. The Amazonification of Christmas. In the late 20th and early 21st centuries, the emergence of e-commerce changed the very physics of the holiday. A gift ceased to be a physical object that you chose with your hands, felt with your fingers, and carried home through the snow. It became a line item in an order, a digital ghost delivered by an anonymous courier. The ancient miracle of the holiday has been replaced by the miracle of logistics. Waiting for the Savior, or waiting for the new year, has been replaced by the anxious tracking of a package on a smartphone screen. The courier is the new priest of the season. Capitalism learned to eliminate the pause. It destroyed the gap between the emergence of a desire and its immediate satisfaction. But in doing so, it triggered a total devaluation of the act of giving. When a thing can be bought in one click and received in an hour, it loses its weight. It loses its sacredness. The gift is no longer a symbol of a relationship. It is merely a warehouse stock-keeping unit, an SKU moving from point A to point B. Capitalism has finally proven that it is stronger than religion, stronger than borders, and stronger than any language. It has created the only truly global event in human history, the holiday of the purchase. All of humanity now participates in this ritual, often without the slightest understanding of what they are celebrating. We are not celebrating the birth of a god or the rotation of the planet. We are celebrating the efficiency of the supply chain. We are worshiping the speed at which we can turn our bank balance into piles of cardboard boxes that will be forgotten by February. Chapter 9. Digital Capitalism, from Ownership to the Algorithm. In the 21st century, capitalism completed its transition from selling physical goods to the total exploitation of attention. In the age of social media, Instagram, TikTok, and Pinterest, the holiday ceased to be an intimate family event. It was transformed into a performance intended for public display. The concept of the Instagram-ready holiday emerged. Now, the consumer buys products not for their utility, not even for personal pleasure, but for their photogenic potential. Capitalism has successfully monetized our vanity. We buy the decor, the food, and the gifts to create visual proof of our happiness for an invisible audience. The holiday has become content production. And the most brilliant part? We are the unpaid advertising agents. We pay for the products, and then we provide the marketing for the brands by showcasing them in our profiles in exchange for the digital dopamine of a like. Now we enter the era of surveillance capitalism. Thanks to big data, corporations now know more about the approaching holiday and your deepest preferences than your own family does. Algorithms analyze your search queries, your likes, and your physical location to push the right product at the moment of your maximum emotional vulnerability. The holiday has stopped being a time for surprises. Capitalism has eliminated the risk of a bad gift, replacing it with precise, cold targeting. We no longer choose. We merely confirm the choice made for us by a neural network. This is the ultimate stage of alienation. Even our desires are no longer ours. They are a product of software code. The festive spirit has been distilled into a predictive model. The mystery of the gift is dead. It has been replaced by the efficiency of the calculation. In the end, capitalism didn't just colonize the holiday. It replaced our very will with an automated transaction. From ownership to access, the sharing economy of the holiday. Digital capitalism has begun to dismantle the very foundation of the middle class, the idea of ownership. We are entering the era of the subscription economy, where it is no longer necessary to own a thing to use it. Look at the modern festive landscape. Renting luxury dresses for a single night. Subscribing to streaming giants for seasonal content. Even renting fully decorated Christmas trees. On the surface, this is marketed as eco-friendly and minimalist. In reality, it is a way to make consumption infinite. Capitalism has learned to sell us the experience instead of the object. We are no longer paying for a thing that will stay with us through the years. We are paying for a temporary feeling of belonging to a lifestyle we cannot afford. This creates a terrifying new dependency. Your holiday is no longer your own. It is a service provided by a platform. The moment you stop your monthly payment, your holiday is effectively switched off. Now let us speak of the new priesthood, the influencers. In digital capitalism, the role of the grand department store and the traditional commercial has been taken over by the human face on your screen. Influencers create a lethal illusion of closeness and sincerity. When you watch a blogger perform an unboxing, your brain is hacked. It activates the same pleasure centers as if you were making the purchase yourself. The holiday has become an endless, high-definition series that we consume through the glass of our smartphones. These digital pastors dictate the trends of the year, forcing millions to abandon their style and their traditions in favor of a new, corporate-sponsored aesthetic. This accelerates the cycle of consumption to a fever pitch. What was fashionable and joyful last New Year is now rebranded as digital trash. We are trapped in a loop of constant updates, where our taste is monitored by algorithms and our emotions are triggered by the hands of someone getting paid to tell us how to feel.